We all know that we need to reduce our carbon emissions to mitigate climate change. And with the UK transport system responsible for over 30% of the UK's carbon emissions, yes, we need to reduce this, but wait. This does not mean the end of the internal combustion engine. The UK government is proposing a ban on the sale of all new petrol motorcycles in the UK from 2035. However, the internal combustion engine is not the enemy, it's the fossil fuels we put in them. Rather than completely reinventing the wheel, what if we could continue running the internal combustion engine version of motorcycles with a sustainable liquid fuel? Bikers and motorcyclists are used to filling their fuel tanks with E5 or E10, with the added ethanol helping to reduce tailpipe emissions. However, wouldn't it be great if we could fill up our tanks with a liquid drop-in fuel, which was sustainable? Is this even possible? With Coryton SUSTAIN, it is.
How can a biofuel that still releases CO2 into the atmosphere possibly be called sustainable? Well, it depends where the carbon comes from. Our food crops take in CO2 from the atmosphere as they grow. After harvest, we can ferment the waste from those plants to make bioethanol and then process that into biogasoline, a sustainable fuel which will pump straight into your car. Your engine does emit CO2 as the fuel burns, but the only CO2 you're releasing had already been taken out by those plants. Then more crops grow to absorb that CO2, and the cycle goes on. Unlike fossil fuels, this gasoline never releases any new carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We have similar options for diesel, plus synthetic and e-fuel processes which extract CO2 directly from the atmosphere. Alongside electric cars, these fuels could reduce our emissions right now. Ask Coryton about our customised, sustainable solutions. And let's get moving.
Luke, welcome to My Motorcycles. Good to have you here. Today we're going to be putting some of the Sustain fuel from Coryton into the Thruxton R. What is this sustainable fuel? How is it made and what is it?
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. It's nice to be here at Mono. So Sustain is a sustainable fuel. It's our brand from Coryton Advanced Fuels. Now, sustainable fuels themselves are a range of different technologies. The technology you've got there is called a biogasoline. So
Right.
It's advanced bio route. It's made from waste biomass, so it's second generation. But then there are other technologies that you might have heard of as well. You might have heard of something like e-fuels, which are synthetic attempts. Our technology is the scalable, most readily available form of gaining GHG emission savings whilst maintaining the use of the internal combustion engine.
The second generation biomass, is that food waste?
Yes, so it certainly is. It's one's conscious that if you are to grow biomass solely for the use of fuels, it will conflict with land which could be used for food. And we don't want a fuel versus food scenario. What there is an abundance of waste from biomass materials. It can be the thresh from corn, it can be waste from sugar beet harvest, it can be the pulp from paper manufacturing. Basically, what you want is anything that has a content of carbohydrate and sugars that you can ferment.
Right.
And that's the first stage of making the fuel. You create ethanol. And then after that, you go to the next stage, which is to create second generation ethanol, which is oligomerized through a special process of catalyst, pressure and heat, which creates the mix of hydrocarbons, which is chemically identical to that of fossil fuels. But fortunately, we keep the fossil in the ground and we recycle the carbon through the biomass process.
I heard you mention the E word that everyone seems to be scared of in motorcycles, especially with carburetors and things. Can that be changed at all?
So let's be clear about this. This is not ethanol which goes in a neat form. The fuel which you'll be trialling today, it is an E10.
Yep.
That's so we can maintain the 100% biomass and bio content within the fuel.
Yeah.
But the sustainable fuel itself is a hydrocarbon.
Right.
So it is not ethanol itself. The ethanol has been processed into a hydrocarbon.
Right.
We will at some point later actually have a new brand of Sustain which is targeted solely at classic vehicles, classic cars, classic bikes.
Yeah.
That will contain no ethanol at all.
Okay.
And it will be primarily designed for older vehicles to ensure their longevity in use.
As a motorcycle technician, that's a good thing to
Absolutely.
hear. So look, from 2035, they're talking about, the government are talking about the end of the ICE engine, I suppose, and you won't be able to go out and buy a new petrol-powered motorcycle. How I'm reading it from what you're telling me is that with this fuel, we can then move forward, or do you think the government will turn around and maybe change those goalposts?
So at the moment, let's just take it as policy that's been mandated by the UK government. As of 2030, the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles is banned, with the sale exclusively to that of electrified vehicles. But this misses one very, very important point. As of 2030, at least 70% of the vehicles on the road will still burn some kind of liquid fuel, which at the moment is predominantly fossil-based. That's a glaring omission in policy. So you're going to have a legacy fleet which is going to be running for many, many years to come, still burning fossil fuels. This is an inherent problem. And this is where current policy is somewhat misguided. It doesn't address any of the fundamental concerns. We don't have enough infrastructure for electrification, which is in itself not a problem, in some cases the preferred option. But if we were to alter the policy slightly, and the mood music is changing in some areas of business, industry and government, where we start to focus on reducing the use of fossil fuels, then you start to have a technologically agnostic approach, where we can accommodate electrified vehicles, hydrogen and sustainable fuel, allowing us the best and most expedient way of reducing carbon emissions, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I suppose with the development of things like that, we already see like cars like McLaren's where they're running battery and huge turbos so they can get massive power out of things. I suppose if they can bring all those technologies together, then really the future is quite bright.
The future can be whatever it needs to be. People will naturally choose the technology that best suits them. If I have a car and I need to travel 25,000 miles in a year, a battery electric vehicle is not going to be the best option for me. If I'm pottering around town and I do 2 or 3 miles per day, electrified vehicle might be great. What we shouldn't do is force people down a route that they're not comfortable with. If we can offer up all the most appealing and suitable technologies available and allow for an expedient reduction in carbon emissions, then surely that's the best course we should follow.
Excellent. So you mentioned that the policies. What are the manufacturers of the sustainable fuels doing about this? Are they putting any pressure on the government?
We work with industry bodies to leverage whatever we can with regard to policy. Now this is with the intention of looking at more sustainable policy. We're not saying and advocating that sustainable fuels are the only option. But the problem currently is that industry is unable to plan for an appropriate future without clear and present policy. And unless the conditions in the environment are properly set, organisations will never be able to properly plan for a future. If policy should itself be mandated and aiming for this ultimate goal, which is carbon reduction. And if it can put in place conditions that allow the technology providers such as ourselves or those working in the fields of hydrogen and electric vehicles the correct conditions and to develop, industry will do it. It doesn't necessarily require a massive amount of finance, but we just need the policy. And that's what we're trying to do through organisations such as UK Pyre and ZEMO, through all-party parliamentary committees, where we can get government and government departments to look at sustainability in a broader sense, not just through the premise and the guise of electrification.
Well, I think it's time to fill the Thruxton up and see how she goes. Here we go then. Sustain fuel, let's see how she runs. I think we'll click her into sport mode because that's where the mode I usually use when I'm riding it, so I can I'll feel the difference a little bit more then. So not a massive amount of difference really. It's, if anything, it feels a little bit sprightlier, but it's early days, it's difficult to say. That was just a roll on in fourth then, and it definitely feels like it's got a little bit more torque. What a lovely noise. Definitely feels a little bit crisper off the bottom end. Be interested to see what the dyno says. Oh, traction control button flashing away there. Look at this for a lovely twist. Woohoo!
To explore that there is no loss in performance by running the Triumph Thruxton R on Sustain liquid fuel, we have run the Thruxton R on E5 and Sustain through a dyno session. So it's
wow,
3, 4, 5, 6 brake horsepower more on fuel. That's pretty good. As you can see from the data, the Thruxton actually performed better while running on Coryton SUSTAIN. This was surprising, but also a good result.
goodness gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, there's some figures I wasn't expecting. I knew it felt slightly more lively, especially off the bottom end. But you know, 6 horsepower, that's not to be sniffed at, is it? Oh, woo, gotta roll it on, I love this bike. But yeah, we don't know how long it's been on at the pump. I know it had been in my bike for probably a month because I was doing some work on it ready for a bike show. So whether that's going to affect the figures, but yeah, I'm blown away by that, to be honest. Right, so we had some great footage of the bike on the dyno. So what's the carbon savings? What's the difference on the carbon savings on the bike?
So the way our fuels are measured for sustainability is based on something called an LCA, or a life cycle analysis. So what we do is we monitor all of the carbon footprint of the fuels from cradle to grave. So this means that from the moment the waste biomass is fermented all the way through to where it's transported, where it's made, how we actually got it here, is monitored for the amount of carbon that's built in. Yeah. Now, for that particular fuel that we've run, this 98 RON E10 for this cycle, we would say that we're probably looking in the region of about 70 to 75% greenhouse gas savings.
Wow.
And what we have to do is we base that on legislation, which is RED II, so the Renewable Energy Directive.
Yeah.
And that has certain laws and requisites by which we get independently audited on. So if we take this particular fuel, based on a life cycle analysis, you're probably looking at 70 to 75% carbon savings.
Wow. The LCA seems to be something that's bantered around a lot within the motor industry at the moment, especially with electric vehicles. What's your thoughts on that?
I've got a particular stance that I don't think LCA is particularly well applied to many technologies. We have to look at our operation now, the way we use our fuels, the way we advise on the greenhouse gas savings of our fuels, and we have to go into a lot of research and be independently audited on how we go about making the claims that we do. The same rules don't seem to apply for electric vehicles.
Right.
And I think that's more a fixation on the tailpipe. And this is not really a criticism per se of the electric car. It's got its place, it's got its purpose. It can help decarbonise transport, but people don't look at what it takes to mine the minerals, the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium from the ground, the cost in carbon of actually extracting it from its ore, transporting it to China to be assembled, transporting it to Europe to go into the car.
Yeah.
And then also, where does the power come from? If it's a gas-fired power station, are we really looking at net zero? So I think on a purely sustainable level, LCA is something which people need to really understand and evaluate on everything, not just fuel or electric cars, but services and our day-to-day lives as well.
Yeah, I suppose ultimately, with the same with electric cars, with electric bikes, even now, there is some use for them. If you're in a city centre, that's ideal. But if you want to go out for a long run, it's still the best option is still really the ICE.
There's organisations, there was a report which we contributed to in MCN, which looked at how different OEMs are going about using the different technologies that are available. It's interesting to see that organisations such as BMW and Ducati still see some level of future in the internal combustion engine. That's not to say that electrification doesn't have its place. Electric vehicles are the best choice in certain circumstances, but in others they will not provide the best option. So let's look at things on a life cycle basis. Let's see which gives us the best carbon reduction on the particular use, and through using sustainable fuels or electric or whatever it may be, allow people to make the best choice for their scenario.
So what are we looking at carbon savings over the life period of a motorcycle?
Right, so let's think of a scenario. So let's take your Thruxton for a minute, Dan. So what, we're going to get, 50 miles to the gallon. I'm sure you ride it conservatively.
Absolutely.
So let's say you do 5,000 miles a year on it and you want to keep it for 10 years, 50 odd thousand miles. If you take the fixed red directive for fossil fuels, and we count for the 5% ethanol that's actually in there, you're looking at about 90 odd grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per megajoule of energy released.
Right.
And we know that about 34 megajoules per litre of energy in gasoline. If you crunch that together, you're looking at my previously prepared numbers, probably about 12 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent over a lifetime at 50,000 miles.
Wow, that's incredible.
So if we take conservatively and say that the fuel that you've dropped in the tank there is about 70% GHG savings, then you're looking at about an 8-tonne saving overall in that 50,000 miles. So that's the sort of carbon savings that can be achieved if we start using sustainable fuels.
Yeah, you think that's just one bike? One bike,
Absolutely.
one rider, one person out fuel. If everybody's doing that, what a difference.
Well, that's the point. And even then, that fuel happens to be 100% bio content. Even if we start incrementally increasing 20%, 30%, you only have to recognise that when they changed premium gasoline from E5 to E10, they estimated that was the equivalent of taking about 500,000 cars off the road in terms of carbon emissions. Wow. Now, we can't fully go to E20 or E30 to that sort of level without changing motorcycle infrastructure, the engine, or currently existing car fleets. But if we can use some of the sustainable hydrocarbons that we make, those can be achieved. And then collectively the carbon savings are significant. But probably more importantly is they can be achieved now. We don't have to wait to 2030, we don't have to wait to 2035, we can start seeing carbon savings now. Okay,
so I suppose the biggest question now is, how long is it before we as the general public can get our hands on this stuff?
Well, you won't see Sustain at the pumps within the next year or so. We are an SME, we don't own all the infrastructure, big oil, but what you will start seeing in the coming months is new sub-brands like the new Sustain fuels that we're developing for the classic car and classic bike markets. And we're going to be targeting businesses specifically. So we're going to be going to distributors for the classic car market. We're going to be working with the motorsport sector, like you're seeing with our work at Dakar, and even going directly to garages, a bit like mono motorcycles, where we can get these fuels out to the people who actually need them. When will you see sustainable fuel in the pumps? Well, interestingly, and many people wouldn't notice, but 25% sustainable diesel is actually available on the forecourts in the UK now.
Oh, right, okay.
And actually in Germany, which are probably a couple of steps ahead of us on the gasoline side, there is actually some instances where on the forecourt there's 30% sustainable petrol. So even without any policy or government support, industry is starting to move, electively towards sustainability and sustainable fuel. So I think 2 to 3 years, you're going to start seeing, at least in a partially sustainable guise, more sustainable fuel available to the general public.
So hopefully a brighter future.
Absolutely, that's what we're working for.
Thanks for joining us today, Luke.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
While the world talks about the electric future, Sustain is a solution for now. On behalf of Modern Motorcycles, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who helped produce this video, and a special thanks to Coryton Fuels for providing the Sustain fuel. And hopefully, with videos like this and you guys watching, we'll see a long and bright future for the ICE engine. Finally, thanks again for watching. See you later.